Hello, welcome back to Soul Search Sunday with Johnny Tiger on Sunday, March 14, 2021. If I appear to be slurring some of my words a little bit or speaking a little bit different from usual, you got to excuse me. I got drafted for a night out with a couple of my best friends, went to the neighborhood pub and had some beer, conversation. And some of you uh, who've been watching these videos for a while know that this seemed to be a standing pattern sometime during the weekend. Either Survival Saturday or Soul Search Sunday would be a little bit under the influence. Now, I must say, as far as Soul Search Sundays go, I actually welcome this kind of distraction because it is when I'm sitting at the table having conversation with friends and inebriating myself with alcohol that some of the best, most uninhibited soul searching happen in my head. Memories and understandings and um, other kind of ideas tend to flow a lot more freely when I am in good company, talking about nothing in particular, nothing of import, and can be free to reminisce about the past and my life and current events and future, etc., etc. We live in a time where people treat communication like it is the hottest thing. It's a magical solution. It is the big word. This is a big secret to successful relationship, and this is something new and worthy and miraculous. I'm not going to say that it is not. In fact, we do live in a very magical time where people just now starting to get a grasp on communication or the art of communication. I don't know how come that music just got loud suddenly. Let me turn that down a little bit. There we go. Uh, not quite sure what happened there. It was the perfect volume when I first turned it on, and then it suddenly just went a little bit crazy. Uh, anyway, communication. Yeah. In fact, for a big part of our history, communication has not been seen as an important tool. And for the most part, if you look at human societal evolution, communication was not something that was valued because it wastes time. It took time to communicate. And as much as it should be common sense, it should be natural for us to be good at communicating because that's something we have to do every day. A lot of us really are not. So throughout history, human society, for the most part, runs on uh, a chain gang mentality, on a bureaucracy. Bureaucracy. I told you I was going to slur some word. Bureaucracy mentality. The person at the top tell the person at the bottom what to do, the person at the bottom tell the next person what to do, and the order get passed down and down. And of course, every time the order get passed down, it loses some of its potency and some of its original meaning or original good intention until when it finally get to the person who have to do the job, it's no longer uh, well-meaning or effective. That's how human society has been for the past about 10,000 years. And suddenly now we have the liberty, we have the freedom, we have the fortune to sit here and say, hey, you can't just tell me that. You can't just expect me to follow that blindly. You have to communicate. Well, I mean, assuming you're living in a democratic country, a democracy kind of country, or a country where freedom and communication is encouraged, which, if you're watching this video, I just kind of assume that you are. Because if you're living in a communist country, I imagine you wouldn't be looking at this video. So a lot of us have gotten really lucky, and a lot of us honestly have kind of gone overboard with throwing around the word communication, communication, as if we really know all the ins and outs about communication. But as I myself continuously finding out, as I continue to grow and learn and explore and find new things that I can do right and new things that I do wrong, it's not that easy. And what we think as effective communication is not always as effective or as finite as we think it is. Let me give you an example. This whole idea about honesty and transparency, this has to be one of the biggest myths in human communication history. The idea that 100% honesty, 100% transparency all the time, everywhere, no matter what, is one of the most harmful things that a person can get lead into practicing, believing, and thinking that's what they want. Because, as I always pointed out, honesty is like alcohol. Okay? Honesty is like alcohol. Some people can drink really high percentage of alcohol. Some people can deal with brutal honesty. But most people don't like it. Most people can't handle high percentage alcohol, and almost no one can deal with drinking 100% alcohol all the time. Just like no one can deal with 100% brutal honesty all the time. In fact, I can almost guarantee you that if suddenly there's a magic power that allow you to read the mind of everyone you encounter and see what everyone around you actually think about regarding you 24 hours a day, within a couple of days, you would probably either go mad, go insane, commit suicide, or kill somebody. Because suddenly you will realize that people don't think the best of you always, even those that are closest to you. I will be the first one to admit of all the people, best friend, girlfriend, family, relative, brother, sister I ever had, there's never been a time where I do not sometime, one time or another, for one reason or another, say in my head, oh, good grief, why don't you just blah 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 and die right now? Why don't you just die and take yourself out of my misery? Everyone I've ever encountered and spent quality time with, best friend, good friend, whatever, I've thought that about them one time or another. And if you are honest with yourself, you probably thought that regarding your closest people uh, one time or another as well. And these are our private thoughts. These are okay. We don't have to feel ashamed of these thoughts because we are human. We are entitled to fantasies and fancies and wild thoughts of anger and revenge and destruction sometimes. That's okay. As long as we don't carry it out and as long as no one ever find out. As long as no one ever have to hear us say these things about them. That's okay. So right there is a great example why transparency, honesty has to be moderated. And the word here, the key word here is diplomacy. Diplomacy. I talked about this before, about some of the most cruel, most hurtful things my mother has said to me in the past. And I'm not going to rehash the whole thing, but let me just take two examples out of that episode. One time, my mom and I were spending time with a friend of hers, and my mom started complimenting my friend's daughter and said, "Wow, she's so talented. She plays piano. She goes to college. She plays sport. She's such a good kid." And then I said, "Wait a second. I do all those things. How come you don't think what I do is that cool?" Without missing a beat, my mom turned around and snapped at me. My mom said, "Because she does it all really well. You, on the other hand, you just do them. You don't do them good well." Ow, that was so hurtful. It hurts even today thinking about how it felt back then, and that was almost 15 years ago. But if I want to take myself out of the hurt mentality and really look at what was going on there, I deserve that. I'm not trying to dress myself down. I'm not trying to let my mom off the hook. It was wrong of her to do it, to say it. But I deserved it. Why? Because I knew in my heart what she was doing. I knew in my heart that my mom really didn't think it was that impressive. My mom in her head was actually thinking, so what? My son do the same thing too. But she had to pretend to be impressed for social nicety. And there I was, trying to burst her bubble, trying to penetrate her lie, her pretentiousness in front of her friend. What was she supposed to do? She couldn't really say to her friend, well, well, actually, my son do all those things better than your daughter, so I was just pretending to be impressed. No, she definitely couldn't do that. So, in my mom's limited education, in my mom's limited idea, knowledge, experience in communicating, she did the first thing that came to her mind, which was to defend herself, defend her dignity, which was to lash out at me. So for me, knowing what she was doing, but wanting an answer regardless of where we were, wanting an answer in front of her friend, I brought that on to myself. I should have known better to keep my mouth shut. I knew the answer already. I didn't need an answer, but it was that almost self-destructive tendency to want to hear her speak the answer that drove me to ask the silly question that made her snap back at me with a silly answer. You heard the term before. You ask a silly question, you get a silly answer. That's just the way it is. I knew it. Even back then, I knew it, but I didn't control my tongue, so I got my feelings hurt for the next 15 years. Another incident last time, back in 2017, 2018, when my mom ran away from home and came to seek refuge with me and stayed at my house for 4 months. And in the end, she decided to go back to my dad after 4 months, after I was running out of money because my mom is a shopaholic, and it was very hard to control her and keep that under wrap. So she decided to go back to my dad in the end, and it happened again. I said, so if you know, if you ran away from home because he was abusing you, if he was abusive, why are you going back to him now? If he abused you so much, why do you go back? Without missing a beat, my mom turned to me and said, because you don't have enough money to keep me happy, that's why. And ouch, You can imagine how much that hurt after spending 4 months trying to take care of her and letting her spend all my money. And then she gave me an answer like that. But again, if I take myself out of the hurt, out of the victim mentality, if I put myself in the side audience mentality, if I look in from the side, if I look in from the side, then I can say I totally asked for that one too, because I knew the answer. It's simple. She's going back because she loved him. That's all. But that wasn't good enough for me. I wanted to force her to say it. I wanted, there's again, a self destruct part of me, sadistic part of me that wanted to hear that out of her own mouth. So I asked a silly question. And again, from my mother's point of view, with her limited experience in honest communication, with her automatically defensive mechanism, she decided to hurt my feeling was the quickest way out of the corner I tried to paint her in. She didn't want to embarrass herself by saying that, yes, despite your dad abused me, I still love him, so I'm going back. If he abused me again, then we'll deal with that. She didn't want to say that. Even though that was the truth, I knew it, she knew it, but she knew I knew it. So that's why she was okay hurting my feeling because she knew I was doing it on purpose. I asked a silly question on purpose, so she gave me a silly and hurtful answer on purpose. Throughout time, I find myself evolving more and more when it comes to communication. When I was younger, when I was a teenager, and when I was a young adult, I was a straight arrow. I was a straight shooter. Right was right, wrong was wrong. There's no gray area. There's no compromise. I was self-righteous. I was like the symbol of justice and equality and all that. Uh, I was going to be the paragon of perfect communication. Everything had to be laid out on the table. Everything had to be put into words. Everything had to be said. This is why my father insisted for me to go to law school when I was in college, because I've displayed this tenacity, this unwavering, unknowing tendency to want everything put into word, to want to argue everything until the last bone, until the last drop. Even when I was a child. This is why my father always said it's a shame that I didn't become a lawyer because I would drive people crazy if I went to court. But as time went by, I realized that was only the first step of communication. That was very shallow step of communication. If we want to learn true communication, better communication, then we need to learn that not everything have to be communicated through word. Not everything have to be communicated through sentences and lines and articles and emails and text messages and talking it over. Sometimes, just like every single joint in our body, the joints are protected by a thin membrane so they don't grate each other, so they don't rub on each other and damage each other more than they do. Sometimes in our communication, we need to remember that between people, there has to be a little membrane, there has to be a little censorship, there has to be a little um, piece of uh, shield that keep people from grating on each other with the truth all the time. Because truth hurts, and too much hurt will turn to bad feeling. I remember this story that I was told probably 10 years ago that first started me on the road of understanding maybe communication is not always about honesty. It's not always about words. It's not always about expressing. your happiness or unhappiness. Sometimes all you need is that little bit of understanding. This little story went something like the man and the woman, they're married to each other. They spent their whole life together. The woman would prepare breakfast for the man every day of their life. And every day it's the same thing. Three scrambled eggs and two pieces of burnt toast. And the man would happily eat it and go to work. And that was their life. Well, among other things, having children and stuff like that. But that was the same breakfast for the entire life. Until one day, the man was lay dying. He's old and sick, and he was dying. And with his last breath, he said to everyone around his bed, he said, "I was so happy. I'm so lucky to have such a good wife. You guys know she made me breakfast every morning of my life. The 60 years we've been married, she made me breakfast every morning of my life. And she does it exactly the same way, and I eat it, even though she always burned her toast, even though the eggs were always overcooked, but I loved her because she made me breakfast." After he died, the wife was talking to people that was attending the funeral, and she said, I never knew that he was eating those breakfasts for my sake. I always burned his toast and cooked his egg the way I did on purpose because that's how I thought he liked them, because he never said anything else. Now, when we listen to this story from our modern psychology point of view, we are thinking, a lot of us are thinking, well, that's just silly. If the guy said something about it, hey, don't burn my toast, or, can you don't overcook my egg, earlier on, that he wouldn't have to suffer uh, through his whole life with a bad breakfast, right? But if you take a step back and really think of what's going on here, it's such a touching story. It's such a touching story. He thought that he was doing the best for her. He appreciated the fact that she was cooking him breakfast, so he ate it without complaining his whole life. And she thought he enjoyed burnt toast and overcooked egg, so she made an effort to do it exactly that way, even though she probably knew that that wasn't very good food. But she did it that way because she thought he liked it for his whole life, for her whole life. So what this is showing, if you really look inside, if you look past the obvious, this shows two people loving each other to death. Two people who love each other so much that they each believed that they were doing the right thing. They were assuming, making the right assumption about each other. And what's wrong with that? Nothing. In the end, they spent a happy life together. He was appreciative of what she did, which was cooking him breakfast every morning, and she was appreciative of what he did. He never hurt her feeling by telling her the toast was burnt, the egg was no good. It was one of the best love story, one of the best example of advanced level communication between two human beings who truly care about each other I ever encountered. There was another story from old Chinese history, and this was a real story. It went that this guy, there's a man who had seven wives. Back then, that was perfectly legal, as long as you could afford it. And this man, he did his best. He did everything to keep his wife happy. He would leave the house in the morning to go to work, and he'd come home at late in the night, and he always had money for them, and he always buy the best food, best clothes for his seven wives. But none of them knew what he did for work because he was very secretive about that. Finally, one day, the seven wives decided, hey, enough is enough. We need to find out exactly, like, is he a nobleman? Is he like a secret agent for the imperial court? What is he? What exactly is he up to? They followed him, and they realized they saw him after walking out of the house. He walked for quite a few city blocks, and he ducked into a back alley, took off his good clothes, and then he dressed in a really shabby set of clothes, and he sat there and begged for the entire day. He was a beggar. He suffered rain and sun and snow and storm every day so he could keep his seven wives happy, so he could beg, he could make enough money. All the money that he begged went to providing for these women. After he came home, none of the women let it known that they now knew the truth. They treat him even better than before, and some of them even started to go out and get work to ease his load. And the eight of them, seven wives and a guy, uh, lived happy together ever after. So where is the incredible part about this story is the seven wives never let on that they knew he was a beggar. They understood what he was doing. They didn't want to hurt his dignity. They didn't need to burst his bubble. They didn't need to lay it out on the table. Look, we know what you're doing. Stop it. No, they kept letting him do what he did because they appreciated the fact that they were doing it for them, and they tried to help him in other ways by being nicer to him, buying less clothes, buying cheaper stuff, being more frugal with money, and some of them even went out and started taking on jobs to help uh, the expenditure of the household. Again, nothing needed to be said. It created a peaceful, happy, very good dynamic uh, in the household because everyone understood what each other were doing. Nothing needed to be said. If the seven wives were to tell him, "We know you're a beggar and you're not going to work, you're going to beg," most likely this guy would be so ashamed and he would have committed suicide and the home would have fallen apart. Quite often, quite often, a lot of people ask me, "Well, so and so is not telling you the truth. Why didn't you say anything about it? Well, so and so is not what they claim to be. Why didn't you do anything about it?" And I always tell people because it's not worth it. It's not important. As long as I know, as long as they know, as long as they know I know, as long as I know they know, nothing need to be said. Just like if you have this really good friend who likes to tell tall tales and big stories, but is otherwise a very decent human being, then it's probably better for you and for him to just keep on pretending that you like his story, you believe in his story, and that for him to continue to believe that he's able to impress you with his story. Because this is the only way, this is the best way for this friendship to continue. If you decide to lay everything out bare, to lay everything out on the table, look, I know you are not a professional athlete. I know you are full of it. I know everything about you, and you don't need to lie to me about it anymore. Then most likely this friendship will not survive because from that point on, he knows and he's feeling ashamed, and when a person feels ashamed, they are not going to go near the source that makes them feel ashamed. So a lot of things is best left unsaid when you already understand it. Of course, this does not mean that you need to just start assuming everything. This does not mean that we should stop talking. But what this means is we need to look for that line where we know, okay, this is, there's no point crossing this line. There's no point asking the next question because I already know the answer. Because they already know the question. So if they don't say it, then I don't say it, and we can continue to be friends. We can continue to be nice to each other. Once I cross this line, once they cross this line, everything will fall apart. Everything will go down into the drain. Because from that point on, we will not be able to face each other without bad feeling. It's important to identify that line. There's an old Chinese proverb that says a lot of time things are able to continue functioning as long as you don't break the paper on the window. What is the paper on the window? Because in the old days, a lot of people didn't have glasses on their window. So a lot of people in the old Chinese days, they have rice paper on the window, in the window frame. And when people look look in through the window, quite often they can only see the brief outline, the shadow of whoever's inside. And for them to see clearly, they would have to poke a hole through the paper on the window. So that's breaking the paper on the window. A lot of time, things look a lot better if you look at them through the paper on the window. Just look at their shadow, just look at their outline, and you can still coexist. The moment you poke a hole through someone else's window and see inside, see everything in its bare naked glory, you may suddenly decide that you can't coexist with that person. That person may decide they cannot coexist with you. Not to mention, now you vandalize their window. So sometimes it's just a good idea to keep that little piece of window paper between you and your best friend, between you and your loved one, between you and whoever you want to keep around you as friend. Not everything have to be laid out. Not everything have to be said. There's even a song that goes something like, "You say it best when you say nothing at all." I think that is really important for us to understand if we want to uh, advance to the next level of good communication between human beings. Thank you for checking out today's Soul Search Sunday. We'll be back again tomorrow for Music Monday. For now, have a good night.